Good morning. Today is Wednesday, July the 1st. Some of you are happy that this year is half over. It's a little frightening that this year is only half over. Nevertheless, here we are, the beginning of July, and the second half of 2020 begins today. I want to tell you a story today. It's a story about some soldiers who didn't yet know that they were soldiers. The enemy was at the door. These soldiers were sequestered from the rest of the world for a particular purpose, but that night they were sequestered away from the world, and the enemy was so near. It seemed that everywhere they went, there were enemy forces trying to spy on them, trying to interrupt them, trying to destroy them. Little did they know there was already a spy in their midst. The city where they lived, it was occupied by those enemy forces. It had been this way for the entire lifetime of nearly every resident. It was 92 years earlier when the enemy had come and invaded and had killed 12,000 residents of the city. And although the current residents, most of them certainly, were not there at the time, they were not about to forget. There was an ongoing anger. There was even a growing hatred towards the enemy. And then there was the ruling class in the city. They seemed to be as threatening as the enemy. They held such power, and they were so convinced that they were so right about everything that it was impossible to reason with them. You had to do things their way, or you were wrong, and thus you were condemned, and then you were outcast. Of course, there were the friendlies there too, those that were not of the enemy nor of the ruling class, just ordinary people. But they seemed to be distracted or simply unaware of how dangerous the situation had become. So these soldiers, who didn't yet know they were soldiers, quietly gathered there in that room for the purpose of observing a ritual for the retreat from the enemy, and to receive from their leader a most unusual gift. He wanted to give them a new weapon. It was a weapon to fight the forces that threatened them. It was actually a form of hand-to-hand combat that he wanted to teach them, although no one had ever seen a hand-to-hand combat like this before. At first, they certainly didn't understand. How could this new fighting technique be of any value against this occupying army or against the oppressing ruling class? One of the soldiers, who didn't yet know that he was a soldier, scoffed at the fighting technique. He didn't want to have any part of it. So his voice of dissent was a wrinkle in their peaceful time together. It seemed that no one understood. No one was ready to demonstrate the show of force that this leader had in mind. Maybe it was too much to ask. Maybe they would be better off just remaining quiet and out of sight. Maybe they should go along with the occupiers or with the ruling class and just blend into the city without making a fuss. But their leader wasn't ready to quit. He had a firm faith that they could accomplish this amazing, almost impossible task. He was sure that this new fighting technique would work, and he knew that the enemy had no way to overcome them if they carried out their plan using this new weapon. This should have been a moment of peace. It should have been a time of unity and strength. But the enemy was outside. The spy was in their group. None of them seemed to understand what was about to happen. Little did most of them know about the attack that would take place later that night. They didn't know they would be trapped by the enemy. They didn't know that the smell of death was in the air. And yet, they had a certain sense of urgency. They needed to finish their meeting. The new weapon needed to be introduced. The conflict was already in the works, and before the evening was over, blood would flow. So the leader stood up and demonstrated the new weapon. He took on each of the soldiers who didn't yet know they were soldiers to show them the power of this new fighting technique. And when he had finished, they left. They left. No ceremony, no last-minute directives. They simply left. And in a few hours, everything would change. The blood would be real. The enemy would seem to have won. The ruling class would be smugly satisfied that they had accomplished something, and the leader would be dead. But the war was just beginning. In a few days, the soldiers would understand indeed that they were soldiers in a whole new kind of battle, and they would begin to use the new weapon to conquer the world. The new weapon. On the outside, this new weapon looked like a towel and a wash basin. On the outside, it looked less than threatening. On the outside, it looked as if they were bowing before the enemy, but on the inside, the weapon made sense. Because the weapon was not just a towel and a basin. It was an attitude of service. It was an act of love. It was a way for one person to affirm the importance of another, and it was a way to bring the power of God into broken lives, even including the broken lives of the enemy and of the ruling class. It was there that night, in that upper room, that Jesus taught them servanthood by teaching them to wash one another's feet. Go practice servanthood today.